The law says a toddler can take the stand, that a 3-year-old can point a finger and send someone to prison for life. Our entire justice system is built for adults, a world of procedure and precedent. But in a sealed courtroom, with a corrupt witness about to win, the only person who told the truth was a little girl who didn't even know what a lie was. This is the reality for over 100,000 children every single year, pulled into a world of sworn oaths and cross-examination. Their words hold the power to dismantle lives and overturn verdicts. But what happens when the corruption isn't in the crime, but in the courtroom itself? When every adult is following a script, and the only soul who can't be bought is a 3-year-old girl in a red dress. This is the story of how a single, innocent sentence, spoken at the perfect moment, shattered a conspiracy and left a judge frozen, his gavel hanging in the air. To understand how that moment became possible, you need to meet the man on trial. Michael Voss wasn't a billionaire or a celebrity. He was a city building inspector in a coastal Florida town, a man who checked foundations and drainage plans. His crime, according to the prosecution, was taking a bribe, $50,000 in cash, handed to him in a restaurant parking lot to approve faulty blueprints for a new waterfront condominium. The case seemed straightforward. The star witness was his former friend and colleague, Robert Silver, who wore a wire and captured the entire exchange. The evidence was audio, the motive was greed, and the trial was supposed to last 3 days. But this was Pelican Bay, Florida, a place where the economy ran on 2 things, tourism and construction, and the Lux Horizon condominium project was the single largest development in the town's history, a $500 million investment. The kind of project that gets fast-tracked when the right people stand to benefit. Michael Voss claimed he was set up. He said the audio was edited. He said he was handed an envelope, yes, but he thought it was paperwork. He said he tried to return it the next day, but Silver had already gone to the authorities. Nobody believed him, because Robert Silver was clean, a decorated former Marine, a family man, active in his church. He had no motive to lie. The prosecution painted Voss as the rotten apple, corrupted by the boomtown money swirling around him. Presiding over the case was Judge William Atticus Byard, 61 years old with 32 years on the bench. He was known as a procedure judge, a man who believed the law was a machine, and if you followed the manual, justice was the inevitable product. He ran his courtroom with strict, unwavering control. He had no patience for theatrics. He despised delays, and he had already, in pretrial motions, severely limited what the defense could ask Robert Silver. No questions about Silver's personal finances. No questions about a previous investigation into bid rigging that was quietly closed. Judge Byard ruled those lines of inquiry irrelevant and prejudicial. The machine was calibrated, and it was moving in one direction, toward a conviction. The pressure wasn't just legal, it was meteorological. The trial was scheduled for the first week of September, and in the Gulf of Mexico, a storm was forming, Hurricane Lisa. Forecast models showed a possible direct hit on Pelican Bay in 5 days. The entire town was in a state of low-grade panic, boarding up windows, buying water, waiting for the evacuation order. Everyone wanted everything wrapped up before the storm hit. The judge, the jury, the lawyers, they all felt the clock ticking in the background, a giant atmospheric deadline. This created a brittle, rushed energy in the courtroom, a desire to get through it, to reach a verdict, and to go home and sandbag your doors. Enter Elena Reed. She was not a lawyer, she was a witness, a quiet, meticulous woman who worked as a project manager for the contractor building Lux Horizon. She was on the prosecution's list to establish the timeline of the construction approvals, but in a private meeting with the defense, she revealed something else. She told them that Robert Silver had been the one to pressure her to sign off on the waived safety inspections. She said she'd seen him in multiple closed-door meetings with the development's owner. She said the audio recording didn't tell the whole story. The defense was electrified. She was their key to poking a hole in Silver's perfect testimony. She was the human flaw in the machine. And then, 2 days before the trial, Elena Reed disappeared. Her house was empty. Her phone went straight to voicemail. She didn't show up for work. The defense cried foul. They filed an emergency motion alleging witness intimidation. The prosecution shrugged. They said she was a reluctant witness who probably just skipped town to avoid the hurricane. Judge Byard was furious at the delay. He denied the motion. He said the trial would proceed without her. The defense's one lifeline had been severed. The machine now had no obvious defects. This is where the child enters the story, but not in the way you think. Elena Reed was a single mother, and she had a 3-year-old daughter, Chloe. When Elena vanished, Chloe was with her nanny, a woman named Maria, who had strict instructions if anything ever happened, take Chloe to her aunt in Tampa. But Tampa was in the hurricane's potential path. Roads were jammed, flights were cancelled. The aunt couldn't get to them, and Maria, with no legal authority, couldn't cross county lines with a child who wasn't hers. So she did the only thing she could think of. She took Chloe to the one place she knew authorities were gathered, the county courthouse. She arrived, frantic, just as the lunch recess was ending in the Voss trial. She pleaded with the bailiffs, saying she needed to find someone to help this little girl. Meanwhile, inside Judge Byard's courtroom, the machine was in its final stages. Robert Silver was on the stand. His testimony was calm, assured, and devastating. He described Michael Voss's growing envy, his complaints about money, the specific moment the cash changed hands. The defense attorney, a public defender named Linda Greer, was doing everything she could. But without Elena Reed, her cross-examination was like throwing pebbles at a tank. She pointed out minor inconsistencies in Silver's dates. She asked about his friendship with Voss. Silver just looked sad, disappointed. It was a performance of pristine credibility. You could see the jury leaning in, believing every word. You could see the hope draining from Michael Voss's face. The verdict was writing itself in the air. And then a commotion at the back doors of the courtroom. A bailiff was whispering to the court clerk. The clerk passed a note to Judge Byard. He read it, his jaw tightening. He hated interruptions. He gavelled lightly. "We have a logistical matter," he said, his voice dripping with annoyance. "There is a minor child in the custody of a caregiver in the hall. The child's mother is a witness in this proceeding who has failed to appear. This court is not a daycare." He ordered the bailiff to take the child and the nanny to a witness room and call social services. The bailiff nodded and moved to the doors. But social services was overwhelmed with hurricane preparations. They said it would be hours. The nanny, Maria, was panicking. She didn't have hours. She begged the bailiff to let her just sit in the back of the courtroom with Chloe, just until someone official arrived. Against protocol, but worn down by the woman's tears and the storm-fueled chaos, the bailiff agreed. He opened the heavy wooden door and ushered them in, pointing to the very last row of the public gallery. He put a finger to his lips. Maria nodded, pulling a coloring book from her bag. Chloe, in a bright red dress, clutched a worn stuffed dolphin. She was quiet, her big eyes taking in the high ceiling, the flags, the serious adults in black robes and suits. She saw a man crying at the defense table. She saw another man speaking firmly into a microphone. And she saw the man in the big chair at the front, the one who had just spoken, the one with the hammer. Robert Silver's testimony was winding down. The prosecutor stood for his final redirect. "Mr. Silver," he said, his voice soft, respectful, "you've described a betrayal of friendship and public trust. Is there anything you'd like to say directly to Michael Voss?" Silver turned slowly in the witness box. He looked directly at the defendant. His eyes were glistening. "Mike," he said, his voice cracking with emotion, "I'm sorry it came to this. I really am. I wish you just told the truth from the start." It was a masterstroke, a performance of remorse that sealed the deal. The jury looked moved. Judge Byard gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of approval. And in the back row, Chloe Reed tugged on her nanny's sleeve. She pointed a small, firm finger at the man in the witness box, the one who was now dabbing his eyes with a tissue. She didn't whisper. In the dead, silent courtroom, her clear, high 3-year-old voice rang out like a bell. "That's the man who made Mommy cry." For 3 full seconds, nothing moved. The sound of the gavel hitting the block didn't come from the judge. It came from the court reporter, whose stenography machine clattered to the floor. The shock was that physical, that immediate. Every head in the room swiveled. The jury, the lawyers, the defendant, all turned to stare at the back of the courtroom. At the little girl in the red dress, her arm still outstretched, her finger still pointing at Robert Silver. On the witness stand, Silver's performance of gentle remorse evaporated. His face didn't twist in anger. It didn't show guilt. It went blank, completely terrifyingly blank, as if the software had crashed behind his eyes. He slowly turned his head from the defendant, following the line of every other gaze until he was looking right at Chloe. He blinked once, twice, and then the mask snapped back into place. He offered a small, confused, sad smile. "I don't know who that is," he said softly to the judge. But the spell was broken. The pristine narrative was cracked. Judge Byard's face was a storm cloud. His wide-eyed shock had hardened into pure, cold fury. This was the ultimate interruption. This was a speck of dust in his legal machine. "Bailiff," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "remove that child immediately." The bailiff jumped into action, moving toward Maria and Chloe. But the defense attorney, Linda Greer, was already on her feet. "Your Honor, objection. A witness has just made a material statement relevant to these proceedings." "That is not a witness, Counselor," Judge Byard boomed. "That is a minor child making an unintelligible disruption." "With all due respect, Your Honor, it was perfectly intelligible," Linda shot back, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it, the flaw in the machine. She identified the state's star witness. She connected him to my missing witness, Elena Reed. This goes directly to bias, to motive, to the heart of the prosecution's case. The prosecutor, a man named David Cohen, stood up smoothly. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. A toddler's babbling cannot form the basis for an objection. It's prejudicial nonsense. I move to strike it from the record and instruct the jury to disregard." "On what grounds would I strike it, Mr. Cohen?" Judge Byard asked, his eyes narrowing. "It's not in the record. The court reporter's machine is on the floor." He pinched the bridge of his nose. The hurricane pressure was in the room now. He could feel it. He needed order. He needed control. "Bailiff, stop. Do not remove them. Take the child and her guardian to my chambers. Now, we are in recess. Jury is excused. Counsel in my chambers in 2 minutes." The gavel came down, hard, bang. In the sudden, chaotic buzz that followed, two worlds collided. The legal world of motions and objections was violently shoved up against the human world of a missing mother and a frightened little girl. Maria, trembling, carried Chloe out through the side door, followed by the bailiff. Robert Silver stepped down from the witness stand, his calm restored, but he didn't look at anyone as he walked back to the prosecution table. Michael Voss, the defendant, turned to his attorney, his eyes wild with a hope he didn't dare name. "Linda, what does this mean?" "It means," Linda whispered, gathering her files with shaking hands, "that the machine just jammed." Judge Byard's chambers were not what you'd expect. They weren't paneled in dark oak, but in pale maple. The books were neatly ordered, the desk devoid of personal photos. It was the office of a man who lived inside the law and nowhere else. Maria sat on a leather sofa, clutching Chloe on her lap. The little girl was now silent, holding her stuffed dolphin tightly, sensing the severe energy of the man in the black robe who loomed over them. "Your name," Judge Byard said, not unkindly, but with zero warmth. "Maria Flores, sir. I am Chloe's nanny. Her mother, Elena, she hired me 6 months ago." "And where is Elena Reed?" "I don't know," Maria said, her voice breaking. "She left for a meeting 2 nights ago. She said she would be back by 10. She never came home. Her phone is off. She told me if anything ever happened to take Chloe to her aunt in Tampa, but with the storm." Judge Byard held up a hand. He turned his gaze to Chloe. He had grandchildren, 2 boys aged 7 and 9. He knew how to speak to them. He crouched down slightly, bringing himself closer to her eye level. "Chloe," he said, his voice softer than it had been in the courtroom. "Can you tell me about the man you saw, the man on the chair?" Chloe buried her face in Maria's neck. Linda Greer, standing by the door with the prosecutor, held her breath. This was the competency test. Could the child communicate? Could she distinguish truth? The fate of the trial balanced on this moment. Maria whispered in Chloe's ear in Spanish, then in English. "It's okay, my corazon asterisk. Tell the judge about the man who visited mommy." Chloe peeked out. She looked at Judge Byard's face, then at the shiny silver badge on the bailiff's uniform. She pointed a tiny finger at it. "Police." "Like police," Judge Byard said. "I need to know the truth." That word seemed to land. Chloe shifted. She looked at the defense attorney, then back at the judge. Her voice was small but clear. "The loud man, he came to our house. He made mommy cry. He said bad words." What kind of bad words? Chloe scrunched her face, trying to remember. He said, sign it. And Mommy cried. She said, I can't. And he said, Chloe's lower lip trembled. He said, or else. Then he saw me. He smiled. It was a scary smile. Robert Silver's calm, church-going demeanor in the courtroom flashed in Judge Byard's mind. The juxtaposition was jarring. A chill, one that had nothing to do with the coming storm, went down his spine. He stood up, his knees cracking. He looked at the two attorneys. She is not giving formal testimony. This is an in-chambers interview to determine logistical issues regarding a missing witness. Is that understood? Both lawyers nodded. The prosecutor, Cohen, looked pale. Your Honor, this is hearsay. This is a child repeating something she may have overheard, something she likely doesn't understand. She understands that her mother cried, Judge Byard said quietly, cutting him off. He was thinking about the rules. The federal rules of evidence said every person was competent to be a witness unless they could not understand the duty to tell the truth. This 3-year-old had just looked at a badge and understood it meant truth. The machine's manual had a provision for this, and he hated it. He made a decision. We are adjourned for the day. The witness, Robert Silver, is remanded to the custody of the bailiff. He is not under arrest, but he will not leave the courthouse. We will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. He looked at Cohen. You will make your star witness available for further cross-examination. And you, he said to Linda Greer, will prepare a line of questioning based on newly discovered potential evidence of witness intimidation. The prosecutor looked like he'd been punched. Your Honor, you can't be serious, on the word of a toddler. Judge Byard's eyes were like flint. No, counselor, on my word. As the presiding judge who now has a reasonable suspicion that the administration of justice in my courtroom may have been compromised. The witness stays. Court is adjourned. The door to the judge's chambers hadn't even fully closed before the digital world exploded. In the recess, a court sketch artist had frantically drawn the scene, the judge frozen, gavel up, the little girl pointing. Someone in the gallery had taken a blurry, long-distance photo with their phone. It was uploaded, tagged, and shared before the bailiff had even reached Silver. The headline wasn't about the bribery trial anymore. It was, Toddler stops trial, points AT witness. The subhead, missing mother's daughter drops bombshell in court. The story went viral not in hours, but in minutes. The pure, raw narrative was irresistible, innocence versus corruption. The hurricane looming in the background only added to the apocalyptic drama. News vans, which had been parked for the weather report, now swiveled their satellites toward the courthouse. Reporters stood in the whipping wind, shouting questions at anyone who walked out. Inside, the courthouse was locked down. Robert Silver sat in a small, windowless witness room with a bailiff. He asked for his lawyer. He asked for a phone call. Both requests were granted, but the bailiff stood right outside the door. In her cramped office, Linda Greer scoured every document she had on the Lux Horizon development. She was looking for anything that connected Silver, not just to Michael Voss, but to the developers, to the money. The file on the quietly closed bid-rigging investigation Judge Byard had forbidden her from mentioning. She couldn't ask about it directly, but maybe, just maybe, she could now dance around its edges. Chloe's statement about sign it could refer to the inspection waivers. It was a thread. A tiny, fragile thread. Meanwhile, in the judge's chambers, William Byard sat alone in the dark. The only light came from the gray hurricane sky outside. He had done something he had never done in 32 years. He had intervened. He had let a feeling, a suspicion, a chill, override pure procedure. The machine was his religion, and he had just introduced a supernatural element, a ghost in the form of a 3-year-old girl. His phone buzzed. It was the chief judge of the district. The call lasted less than a minute. Bill, what in God's name is happening over there? Is this a circus or a courtroom? Byard offered only terse, procedural answers. Yes, a recess was called. Yes, a matter regarding a missing witness was being examined. No, the trial was not compromised. When he hung up, his hand was steady, but his mind was racing. The system was closing ranks around him, and he was now outside of it. At that moment, there was a soft knock. The bailiff entered. Judge, the nanny, Maria Flores. She says she remembers something Alina Reed told her the day before she disappeared. Send her in. Maria entered, wringing her hands. Chloe was asleep now, curled on the sofa in the outer office. Judge, I am sorry to bother, But when I put Chloe to bed tonight, I remembered. 2 days ago, Elena was very stressed. She said she had to go see someone from the city. She said if she signed his papers, it would be bad, but if she didn't, he had pictures. Pictures? Bayard leaned forward. What kind of pictures? She didn't say, but she was crying. She said, he has pictures of me and Chloe at the park. He says they look threatening. She was scared for her daughter, Judge, not for herself, for Chloe. The chill in Judge Bayard's spine became ice. This was no longer about bribery. This was about coercion, blackmail, and a witness who might have been silenced not because she wouldn't talk, but because she was about to. He thanked Maria and dismissed her. He picked up his direct line to the courthouse security chief. I want the security footage for the entire courthouse perimeter for the last 48 hours, every camera, and I want the phone records for Elena Reed pulled. Get a warrant, use my name, do it now. He was no longer just presiding, he was investigating. The roles were blurring, and with every step he was stepping further away from the bench and into the messy, dangerous world of facts. The storm wasn't just in the Gulf anymore. It was here, in his chambers, in his courtroom, in his head. And tomorrow, at 9 a.m., he would have to gavel it back into order, knowing everything he now knew. He looked at the clock. 14 hours until the trial resumed. 14 hours to find a missing woman, to unravel a conspiracy, and to decide if a 3-year-old girl would have to climb into a witness chair and point her finger at a man again, this time under oath. The machine was broken, and he had no idea how to fix it. The first call Judge Bayard made wasn't to a detective, it was to his wife. Margaret, he said, the moment she answered, I need you to pack a bag for me, and I need you to go stay with your sister in Gainesville tonight. A long silence on the line. Bill, what's happening? Is it the hurricane? It's not the hurricane, he said, watching the gray clouds churn outside his window. It's something else. I can't explain, just please go and take the dog. He hung up before she could ask more questions. The precaution felt both melodramatic and utterly necessary. The word pictures was stuck in his head. Pictures of a mother and child at a park, framed as a threat. If someone was willing to do that to silence a witness, what would they do to silence a judge who was digging? He then called the head of courthouse security, Frank Delaney, a former police captain with 20 years on the job. He relayed Maria's story about the pictures. Frank, I want you to pull Elena Reed's personnel file from the contractor, get her photo. I want you and 2 deputies you trust absolutely to review every frame of footage from the public parks near her home for the past 2 weeks. Look for anyone filming her, anyone watching. Judge, Frank's voice was gravelly with skepticism. That's hundreds of hours of footage. We don't have the manpower, especially with the storm. Use the facial recognition software the county bought for the transit system. It's supposed to be for lost children. Use it for this. And Frank, do not log this request through the normal system. Use a standalone drive. Tell no one but the 2 deputies you bring in. Another silence, longer this time. You think the problem is in-house. I think, Judge Bayard said slowly, I can no longer be sure where the problem is. While the judge launched his shadow investigation, Linda Greer was chasing a different thread. She finally gotten a call back from an old law school friend who now worked at the state's financial regulatory office. She asked about the bid rigging investigation that had been closed. Officially, it was lack of evidence, her friend said. Unofficially, the file was ordered closed by someone in the city attorney's office. Pressure from the mayor's Economic Development Council. The Lux Horizon project was too big to fail. Who in the city attorney's office? Linda asked, pen poised. The memo was signed by the first assistant city attorney, a guy named Philip Grave. The name meant nothing to Linda, but when she typed it into the state bar database, a connection snapped into place with an almost audible click. Philip Grave, education, University of Florida School of Law, class of 1998, she scrolled. So was Robert Silver, same law school, same graduating class, they were classmates. This wasn't just corruption, it was a network. She immediately filed a sealed, ex parte motion with Judge Bayard, a motion only the judge would see, requesting permission to question Silver about his relationship with Grave and the closed investigation. It was a Hail Mary, but the judge, now operating in uncharted territory, granted it. the scope of the cross-examination for tomorrow just expanded exponentially. Across town, in a secure witness room, Robert Silver was on the phone with his lawyer. His calm was gone. "She's a child. She doesn't know what she's saying. This is insane." "Robert, listen to me," his attorney, a seasoned criminal defense lawyer named Arthur Brandt, said calmly. "The judge is on a fishing expedition. He has no evidence. A toddler's statement is not evidence. We stick to the plan. You are the victim here, remember? You wore the wire. You did the right thing. This is a tragic distraction." "What about the mother?" Silver hissed, lowering his voice. "Where is she?" "I have no idea, and you don't either." "Understood." Brandt's voice was ice. "You do not know Alina Reed. You have never spoken to her outside of official city business regarding permit timelines. The child is confused. That is our line. Now I need you to think. Is there anything at all, that connects you to Philip Grave in a way we need to explain?" Silver was quiet for too long. "Robert, we were in the same fraternity," Silver finally said, his voice flat. "We've had dinner. It's not a secret." "It is now," Brandt said. "You've never discussed the Lux Horizon project with him. You've never discussed Michael Voss. You are two old friends who occasionally have a meal. Do you hear me?" Silver hung up. He stared at the blank wall. The blankness from the courtroom was back, but underneath it, a new calculation was running. The machine he had helped oil was sputtering. The unpredictable human element, a child, had been introduced. He needed a new variable, a pressure release valve. At 8 p.m., as the wind began to pick up outside, the security chief, Frank Delaney, knocked on Judge Byard's chamber door. He held a laptop. His face was grim. "We found it, Judge, County Park 4 days ago, 2:30 in the afternoon." He played the footage. It showed Alina Reed pushing Chloe on a swing. The footage was from a fixed park security camera, but in the lower corner of the frame, a man in a hoodie sat on a bench, holding a phone pointed directly at them. He sat there for 27 minutes. He never looked away from them. "Can you get a face?" Byard asked. "No hoodie, sunglasses, but we ran the park's entrance gate camera. He arrived in a car." Frank switched to another clip, time-stamped just before the man appeared on the bench. A dark sedan pulled into a parking spot. The driver's door opened. The man in the hoodie got out, but for one single frame, as he turned to close the door, the hood fell back slightly. It wasn't a perfect shot, but it was enough. Judge Byard leaned in. The man had a distinctive salt-and-pepper flat-top haircut, a military bearing. He knew that silhouette. He'd seen it walking into his courtroom every day this week. It was one of the prosecution's paralegals, a man named Carl. He wasn't just watching Alina Reed. He was stalking her for the prosecution team. The chill in Byard's spine turned to fire. This wasn't Silver acting alone. This was the prosecution's office using intimidation tactics on a defense witness. The conspiracy wasn't just on the stand. It was at the opposing counsel's table. "Do not confront him," Byard ordered, his voice shaking with rage. "I want him watched. I want his phone records pulled. I want to know every number he called after he left that park." But it was too late for quiet surveillance. At that moment, the internal courthouse phone rang. It was the bailiff stationed outside Silver's room. His voice was tight. "Judge, you need to come down here. Now, the witness, he's having some kind of episode. He's demanding to make a new statement. He says he wants to confess." Byard and Delaney exchanged a look. This was a move, a desperate, calculated move. They rushed downstairs. Robert Silver was not having an episode. He was preternaturally calm. He sat at the small table, his hands folded. "Judge," he said, "I can't do this anymore. The guilt is eating me alive. I need to come clean." Arthur Brandt, his lawyer, was pinching the bridge of his nose, looking furious. "My client is under severe emotional distress, Your Honor. He is not in a fit state to make statements." "I am perfectly fit," Silver said, looking directly at Byard. "I lied on the stand. Michael Voss never took a bribe." The room froze. Linda Greer, who had been called down, felt the air leave her lungs. Silver continued, his voice a monotone of rehearsed remorse. "I planted the money in his car. I edited the audio with a software program. I did it because I was jealous. He was getting a promotion I wanted. I saw my chance to ruin him." He hung his head. "I am so ashamed." I let my personal feelings corrupt my duty. I will accept whatever punishment the court sees fit. It was a breathtaking gambit, a sacrifice of the pawn to protect the king. Silva was confessing to a lesser crime, personal jealousy and falsifying evidence to cover up the bigger one, a conspiracy involving the city attorney's office and the intimidation of witnesses. He was falling on his sword. The narrative was now one bad apple, a rogue city employee, not a systemic plot. The machine could handle one broken gear. It couldn't handle a corrupted engine. Judge Byard saw it instantly. This was the pressure release valve. Silva's confession would end the trial. Michael Voss would walk. The bigger questions about Grave, about the paralegal, about the missing mother would get lost in the euphoria of a wrongful conviction overturned. The hurricane would hit, the news cycle would move on, and the real architects would be safe. "Where is Alina Reed?" Byard asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Silva looked up, genuine confusion on his face. "Who? I don't know any Alina Reed. Is that the missing woman? I have no idea. This is about me and Mike, that's all." He was good, he was so good. The blankness was a weapon, allowing him to shed one story and put on another seamlessly. Byard made a decision. "Your confession is noted. Bailiff, place Mr. Silva under arrest for perjury and falsifying evidence. Mr. Brandt, you may confer with your client." He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "Oh, and Mr. Silva, your phone will be subpoenaed. All of your communications for the past 6 months, including with one Philip Grave. We'll see how jealous you really were." For the first time, the blank mask on Robert Silva's face cracked, just a flicker in the eyes, fear. Back in his chambers, Judge Byard's personal cell phone rang. A blocked number, he answered. A distorted, electronic voice spoke. "Judge Byard, you have a lovely home, colonial style. The blue hydrangeas by the porch need water." The line went dead. They weren't just threatening witnesses, they were threatening him. The pictures weren't just of Alina and Chloe, they were of his house, his life. The storm wasn't just outside, it was at his doorstep. He looked at the clock, 10 p.m., 11 hours to go. He had a corrupt witness in custody who had just confessed to a cover-up crime. He had a missing woman, possibly in grave danger. He had a prosecutor's office, potentially involved in witness intimidation. He had a hurricane set to make landfall at dawn. And he had to decide, by 9 a.m., whether to let a 3-year-old girl take the witness stand and testify against a man who had just confessed to a different crime, all to prove a conspiracy she couldn't possibly understand. The weight of it was immense. He was no longer just interpreting the law. He was standing in the broken center of it, trying to hold the pieces together as the wind began to howl. The gavel in his mind was silent. For the first time in his career, he had no idea what ruling to make. The gavel struck at 9:07 the next morning. Judge Byard had not slept. The call about his hydrangeas had been followed by 2 sheriff's deputies arriving at his home to escort his wife to her sister. He had spent the night in his chambers, reviewing files by the eerie glow of a battery-powered lantern, the courthouse running on emergency generators as Hurricane Lisa's outer bands lashed the windows. The world had narrowed to this room, this case, this impossible decision. The courtroom was different. The public gallery was empty, cleared for safety. The jury box held only 7 jurors, 5 had evacuated overnight. A constitutional minimum, but barely. The air smelled of damp wool and fear. Michael Voss looked hollow-eyed. Robert Silva, now in custody, sat at the defense table with his lawyer, Arthur Brandt, having been granted immunity for his new confession. The prosecutor, David Cohen, looked like he'd aged 10 years, avoiding eye contact with his own paralegal, Carl, who sat rigidly in the first row. And in the judge's arms, which he would never admit to anyone, Judge Byard held Chloe. She was awake, quiet, clinging to her stuffed dolphin. He had carried her in from his chambers. He set her down gently in the witness chair. It was enormous for her. Her feet didn't touch the ground. A bailiff placed a thick law book under her for a booster. The court reporter, machine repaired, poised her fingers. "Chloe," Judge Byard said, standing beside the bench, not behind it. His voice was the soft one from his chambers. "Do you know what a promise is?" Chloe looked at Maria, who gave a shaky nod from the gallery. Chloe looked back at the judge. "You keep it." Yes, I need you to make a very important promise, a promise to tell the truth. Can you do that? She nodded solemnly. You have to say, I promise, Judge Byard said. I promise, Chloe whispered. It was not a sworn oath, it was better, it was a child's promise, and in that moment, it carried more weight in the room than any Bible ever had. Linda Greer approached, her heart in her throat. Chloe, honey, do you see the man over there? She pointed to Robert Silver. Chloe's eyes found him. She nodded, her lower lip tightening. Can you tell me what you told the judge about him coming to your house? The room was so quiet they could hear the wind-driven rain hitting the windows. Silver stared straight ahead, his face a placid mask, but a muscle in his jaw ticked. Chloe took a deep breath. He came when I was painting, he was loud. Mommy told me to go to my room, I peeked. He had papers, Mommy was crying, he said. She scrunched her face, the memory clear. He said, sign it, Ellie, or the pictures go to everyone at your daughter's preschool. He said they'd think Mommy was a bad lady. He said they'd take me away. A stifled gasp came from the gallery. Maria put a hand over her mouth. And then what happened? Linda asked, her voice gentle. He saw me, he stopped being loud, he smiled at me. It was a scary smile, then he left. Chloe's eyes filled with tears. Mommy cried a long time, she said we had to hide. Objection, Arthur Brandt was on his feet. This is heartbreaking, but it's still hearsay. It's a child's interpretation of an argument she couldn't possibly understand. Judge Byard didn't even look at him. Overruled. The witness is describing acts of intimidation she personally observed. Continue, Ms. Greer. Linda felt a surge of adrenaline. The machine was broken, and the judge was using the pieces to build something new. No further questions. The prosecutor, David Cohen, stood slowly. He looked at Chloe, then at his shoes, then at the judge. He seemed to be wrestling with something monumental. Finally, he said, I have no questions for this witness, Your Honor. It was a surrender. The prosecution was conceding the point. The case was collapsing in real time. But Judge Byard wasn't finished. The court has a question. He walked back to the bench and picked up a document. Ms. Greer, you filed a sealed motion regarding one Philip Grave, First Assistant City Attorney. I am unsealing it now. He slid the paper to the bailiff, who delivered it to a stunned David Cohen. Given the testimony just offered regarding threats involving a child's welfare, I am expanding the scope of this proceeding. I am calling Mr. Grave to this courtroom today to answer questions about his communication with the witness Robert Silver and the closure of a prior bid-rigging investigation. Cohen went pale. Your Honor, you can't. That's a separate matter. There's no basis. The basis, Judge Byard interrupted, his voice like steel, is that this court now has reason to believe a conspiracy to obstruct justice may reach into the city attorney's office. Bailiff, escort Mr. Cohen's paralegal, Mr. Carl, to a holding room. His phone, please. He turned his gaze to Carl, the man from the park footage. You are not under arrest yet, but you will speak to the sheriff's investigators about your photography hobby. As the bailiff moved, the door at the back of the courtroom burst open. Frank Delaney, the security chief, stood there, rain-soaked and breathing hard. He held up a cell phone. Judge, we found her. We found Elena Reed. All oxygen left the room. She's alive. She's at Memorial Hospital. She was in a car accident last night out on Route 9. Single vehicle, went off the road in the rain, but the deputy who responded thought it was suspicious. Her brakes were cut. She'd been hiding in a friend's fishing cabin since she disappeared. She was on her way back to town to try to talk to you when someone ran her off the road. Robert Silver's mask finally, completely shattered. His head snapped toward the door. That's not possible, he whispered, the words escaping before he could catch them. Every eye in the courtroom turned to him. The perfect, controlled witness had just reacted to news he supposedly knew nothing about. Judge Byard saw it, the final crack. Ms. Greer, he said, never breaking eye contact with Silver, you may recall the witness Robert Silver to the stand. What followed was not a cross-examination. It was an unraveling. With the news of Elena's survival, with the immunity deal for his false confession now void because it was offered in bad faith, with the specter of Philip Grave being dragged in, Silver's calculus broke down. Linda Greer, with surgical precision, presented the evidence. The park footage of his paralegal, the law school connection to Grav, the phone records showing 14 calls between them in the week before Alina disappeared. She didn't ask questions, she made statements, and each one made Silver shrink smaller in the chair. Finally, she asked the only question that mattered. Who cut Alina Reed's brakes, Mr. Silver? He said nothing. He looked at his lawyer, who was furiously taking notes, already building an appeal. He looked at the judge, whose expression offered no mercy. He looked at the little girl in the big chair, who was watching him with clear, unblinking eyes, the eyes that had seen his scary smile. "I want a deal," Silver said, his voice hollow. "The time for deals is over," Judge Byard stated. "You are under arrest for the attempted murder of Alina Reed, bailiff." As the bailiff moved to handcuff him, Silver's defiance returned in a last, desperate surge. He stood up, pointing a furious finger at the prosecutor's table. Cohen knew about the pressure on the woman. He said keep her in line, and Grav gave the orders. The project had to be protected. The money, it wasn't just the bribe. It was the whole damn budget. Voss was the fall guy because he wouldn't play ball. The courtroom devolved into chaos. David Cohen shot up, yelling about outrageous allegations. Judge Byard's gavel cracked down again and again until silence returned, heavy and thick. He looked at the remaining 7 jurors. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you are dismissed. The proceedings against Michael Voss are concluded. The evidence of a conspiracy to frame him is overwhelming. Mr. Voss, you are free to go." He then turned to the prosecutor. "Mr. Cohen, you will surrender your bar card to the bailiff. You are suspended from practice pending an investigation by the Ethics Committee. This court will be referring this entire matter, including the conduct of Philip Grav, to the State Attorney General and the FBI." He looked exhausted. The weight of the night, of the broken system, was on his shoulders, but he had one more thing to do. He stepped down from the bench and walked over to the witness chair. He lifted Chloe out. He didn't say anything to the court. He simply carried her, past the stunned lawyers, past the weeping defendant, past the crumbling apparatus of the corrupted machine, out of the courtroom, and toward the hallway where her mother, alive and injured, but alive, was being brought in from the storm. The fallout was swift and brutal. Philip Grav was arrested before lunch. The mayor announced an independent audit of the Lux Horizon project. The FBI opened a racketeering investigation that would eventually net 3 city council members and 2 wealthy developers. Michael Voss filed a multi-million-dollar wrongful prosecution lawsuit and won. He used part of the money to start a legal defense fund for people accused of white-collar crimes. Robert Silver, facing attempted murder and conspiracy charges, turned state's evidence. His testimony helped convict Grav and the others. He received a 15-year sentence, a ghost of the man who had once sat so confidently on the stand. But the most profound change was in the man who had presided over it all. Judge William Atticus Byard, the procedure judge, retired from the bench 6 months later. He didn't write a book or go on a speaking tour. He quietly joined a nonprofit that provided legal advocates for children in the court system. He became a frequent visitor to a certain park, where he would sometimes push a little girl on a swing while her mother, walking with a cane from her injuries, watched from a bench. The final, surprising detail came out years later in an interview he gave to a law journal. He was asked why he allowed the child to testify that morning against all conventional wisdom. He said, "The law is a machine we built to find truth, but sometimes truth arrives in a form the machine isn't calibrated to recognize. It doesn't raise its hand. It doesn't swear an oath. It just points a finger. My job that day wasn't to be a mechanic. It was to be a witness. To see what she saw, and to have the courage to believe it." The hurricane eventually passed. The sun came out. The power returned. And in a quiet corner of a rebuilt garden, a stone bench was dedicated, not to a person, but to an idea. The inscription read, "For the courage of the smallest voice, and for those who learn to listen." That stone bench isn't a monument to a verdict. It's a memorial to a moment of pure, unmediated human recognition. The moment a child saw a scary smile, and a judge, against every instinct of his training, decided to see it too. We build systems to protect us from chaos. Courts, laws, procedures, They are elaborate machines designed to filter out noise and find signal. But what happens when the signal is a feeling, a chill down the spine, the clear, certain voice of a 3-year-old who doesn't know what perjury is, but knows what a scary smile means? We are taught to distrust that, to call it hearsay, to dismiss it as emotional, unreliable. This story asks an uncomfortable question. What if our machines, in their quest for order, have become blind to a certain kind of truth? The truth that isn't in a document or a recording, but in a trembling hand, in a silent tear, in the way a person's face goes blank when they are caught. The law says a toddler can take the stand, but do we have the courage to let them? And more importantly, do we have the wisdom to hear what they're actually saying? For every Michael Voss, there are countless others trapped in systems that have mistaken procedure for justice. For every Chloe, there are small, brave voices that go unheard because they don't speak the right language. And for every Judge Bayard, there is a professional, somewhere, facing the terrifying choice between following the manual and doing what is right. This channel exists for those stories, the ones that happen in the quiet corners of courtrooms, in hospital hallways, in the back seats of cars, and in the gardens we build to remember what we've lost. The moments where humanity breaks through the bureaucracy. If this story reminded you that truth often wears an unexpected face, then you're in the right place. Hit subscribe. Every new subscriber tells the algorithm that these are the stories worth telling, that depth matters more than distraction. Leave a comment below. Tell me about a time you saw a small act of courage change a big outcome. Or just say hello, I read them all. We don't shout here, we don't chase trends, we listen. For the question in the silence, for the truth in the pointing finger, for the crack of light in the broken machine. And we will keep listening as long as you're here to listen with me. Thanks for watching.